I've been in a number of different spaces this week and a number of different meetings where folks are processing the news that came out, the leaked opinion from Associate Justice Samuel Alito, which looks like the Supreme Court is positioned to overturn Roe v. Wade. And there's been a lot of folks who are upset about that. And I think there's good reason, right? Body autonomy is something that I think maybe some of us fought very hard for many years, and that some of us have been able to take for granted for quite a while, and others haven't. And, we are an arts and cultural advocacy organization, but we understand how arts and culture fit into the larger fabric of community and life, and the people both within our sector who will be affected by this, as well as the folks that we serve who will be affected by this. And so I want to remind us that in June of 2020, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we held a webinar where Tracy Konopinski, our former program director, took the group through a training. And the training was in reference to the work of Deepa Iyer, who had created this matrix about social change roles in times of crisis. And these are, I think, some really helpful resources to remind yourself. I actually looked back and reflected on it this week to remind us that there are many roles that we can play in a time of crisis, and that you can find ways, and your organizations can find ways to engage on this, however is appropriate. I want to actually call out Company One, who I thought did some really fantastic social media communications around what happened earlier this week. And so I just want to remind us that we as a community are part of a larger community, and that we can be in conversation and in support of that work. So thank you all for joining us this morning. I am now going to share my screen. One moment. I also asked, for those of you arriving later or just arrived, I had asked folks to introduce yourself with your name, how you fit within the arts and cultural community, and then who you were planning on placing your wager on in the Kentucky Derby this Sunday. That is mostly because I lived in Louisville, Kentucky for a decade, and the entire Derby Festival experience is something that I know quite closely. And so beyond sports betting is something that I care quite a bit about. But let's get started. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So it is May 6th. There is quite a bit happening on the state level in terms of legislation and moving and machinations. So let's get into it. So first, let's talk about the state budget. So last week, the House passed their budget. And so this is where we are, right? So Baker submitted his budget proposal, the House passed their budget in April, and it looks like next week the Senate Ways and Means Committee will release their version of the budget, and then the week of the 24th of May, the Senate will debate that budget. So we are just moving along in a clip here. So I want to just recap what our advocacy efforts together have been, right? So Representative Dylan Fernandez, who is the vice chair of Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development in the House, he filed an amendment to increase the amount that the House Ways and Means had recommended. They had recommended 22.5 million. So he filed an amendment to bring it up to 27.4, which is what the agency requested. 74 members of the House co-sponsored that amendment. That's pretty great. That's almost 50%. And again, and I just want to sort of, as a kind of watermark or as a mile marker here, our sector is sort of notorious in a good way for the amount of advocacy and the amount of support we enjoy in the legislature when we file amendments. And so this is, again, a continuation of that work. And so I think we should be proud to see that our collective advocacy efforts over many years have resulted in members of the House saying, yes, I care about this. I want to have that conversation, or I want to, support that amendment. We also, over 500 of us signed on to a letter of support for that amendment. We also requested that the House, if they were to include any earmarks on that line item, that they not subtract from the amount that that was available for granting from the agency, but add on to it, which is an important part of that conversation, right? There are other line items where earmarks are added and it just decreases the amount available for a transparent and equitable grant process and distribution process. So we submitted that letter, and these are good. These are good things that we did. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it up to that 27.4 amount. We ended up getting 23.1 with 22.5, which was the original amount recommended or proposed by House Ways and Means, still available for Mass Cultural Council operations and grant projects or grants. And then about 600,000 was included for specific projects for earmarks, right? And we have on our website a little bit more of an in-depth review. You can see which earmarks, which projects got additional funding. So that's sort of where we are. This is good, right? Like, we continue to move through the process. This is how the process works, right? It's a long game of negotiation. So when we see what the Senate proposes, the Senate Ways and Means proposes, we will share that information out and our advocacy strategy to complement that. So next, let's talk about the governor's capital budget. So what's a capital budget? So there are a couple of different government budgets, right? There's the general operations budget, which is what that fiscal year budget, right, is that we deal with every year. And then also every year, the governor releases, the executive branch actually releases a capital budget. And this is for all sort of spending related to capital or fixed assets. So that's buildings, that's roads, it's infrastructure, right? It's also the Cultural Facility Fund. That's where that money comes from. That is then co-administrated between Mass Development and the Mass Cultural Council. This is also interesting because the way it works is that the money for the capital budget is raised through the sale of bonds, right, on the bond market. So they have to raise the money in order to spend the money. And so the legislature works to put together that bond bill, and they say, okay, here's how much money we're willing to try and say we can raise, and here's how much we want you to use for various projects. So in some ways, the legislature gives the governor some guidelines about how to spend that money, but ultimately it is the governor's decision about where he or she is going to put those resources. They basically have a max, but they don't have a minimum. And so it's not a given that every year the governor will include an annual amount for the Cultural Facilities Fund. He did, again, which is good news. And it is again going to be at $10 million. So that is something just to sort of mark that we continue to work on that process. Also to know, and I don't have a slide about this, but there is actually a capital bond bill that the governor filed and is being considered by the bonding committee right now. And included in that is a reauthorization. So the way that the Cultural Facilities Fund works is it's in like 5-year stints. It says, like, for the next 5 years, we want to be able to spend this much money for the Cultural Facilities Fund and include that in the bonds fundraising that we do. And so the governor again put that number at 50 million. So that's 10 million each year. And so we're going to kind of pay attention to that and see if there's an opportunity to advocate to increase that amount, right? It's been at 10 million for quite a while, and everyone on this call knows that the need and it far outweighs what's available. So we're going to continue to work on that. So next, let's talk about the Economic Development Bond Bill, which is Baker's forward bill. In another life, I definitely want the job of being able to come up with what the names are for bills and what the acrostic poem is that fills out those words. So this is the future opportunities for resiliency workforce and revitalized downtowns. This is a $3.5 billion bill. It's not just for bond authorizations, so it also includes the remaining amount of American Rescue Plan Act funds that the state has to spend. Or make decisions about where they want to spend it. So you can see on the slide, that's how that breaks out, right? 1.2 billion for state bond authorizations and 2.3 billion in ARPA funds. Let's dig into that a little bit. I want to talk about those ARPA funds. So there's many things that the governor wants to use that ARPA spending for. I have cherry picked 3 that I think are probably of interest to the arts and cultural community. The first one is that Hire Now program. This is the program that nonprofits and for-profits can apply to incentivize people to join your organizations, to apply to work for your organization. And included in that is you can use some of that money for signing bonuses or retention bonuses for those people. You can also use it to offset training time that you might need for them to be trained on the job with another more experienced staff member. And so in this proposal, the governor wants to include an additional 25 million for that program. He's also proposing transferring about 300 million to the unemployment trust fund, which is something that for some of us who don't pay in regularly to the trust fund, this was an issue that came up way back when the pandemic first started and folks had to consider layoffs. It is a good thing to have that trust fund be replenished and stable, right? And then finally, this is sort of a big part of this is really using the forward bill to incite more economic growth and activity, particularly in downtowns and main streets. So there is 108 million that is specifically allocated to almost every city and town in Massachusetts for downtown recovery grants. And you can look through the entire list in the link that we've shared. You'll also see there are a number of sort of infrastructure projects or economic development projects that cities and towns are looking to get money for. So next Monday, the Committee on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies will have a hearing on this bill. Secretary Keneally, who is the Secretary for Economic Development for Governor Baker, will testify. And we, Mass Creative, is considering what testimony we might submit to talk about the needs for the arts and cultural community in that economic development bond bill. So remember, this is sort of like the process is just starting here, right? Like it was proposed by Baker. It's got to be, the committee's got to hear it. The committee's then going to vote to how to report it out. Then it will go to Ways and Means, and then it will go through the process of being heard and debated by the House and then by the Senate. All right, so what's with all these big bills, right? Like there's a lot of activity. And so just a reminder, right? Like the session, the Massachusetts legislature works in 2-year sessions. So the first year, all the bills are filed. And then by the end of the second year, something has either happened to those bills or they have sort of lingered and withered on the vine, and nothing will happen with them. They die, right? And so the end of this year, of the 2-year session right now, will be in December of 2022. The end of formal sessions, right, where you don't have to worry about a member of the House or the member of the Senate standing up and saying like, I want to vote on quorum. Is there enough people in this room to actually vote on this bill? Those formal sessions end on July 30th. And then the legislature takes an August recess. They come back in the fall. They're in informal sessions and basically doing the daily government work, but they're not sort of taking on these massive bills that have a lot of stakeholders who are engaging in them and perhaps require negotiation. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of activity, and we're going to see a ton of activity leading up to that July 30th deadline. This is where I'm just the government nerd, but on July 30th at midnight, the legislature can vote to stop time. They can literally say, we're going to stop I'm sure someone on this call knows what the proper term is, but they basically say like, we're pretending it's not 12:01 on August 1st. We're going to continue to pretend it's July 30th as we continue to negotiate. And that's the night where the legislature and all of their staffs continue to be in the building working on these well past midnight, which I don't know, it's just a fun little kooky thing that you can do in order to move things forward. But the biggest negotiating piece that both the House and Senate have are deadlines, right? And so we will see more of these bills sort of move. You know, somebody, Nikki, you referenced the sports betting bill that the Senate worked on last week. That was a long time coming. They had been kind of stalling or holding on that bill, but they finally took a vote on it, and they have a version of that bill, which is something that the House is very passionate about. That's a priority for them. Similarly, mental health is a priority for the Senate. There's also, I'm sure if you're listening or paying attention or doing any reading, you know, there's a lot of conversation about should there be tax relief included in any of these bills, right? So there's just all of this sort of horse trading, to use a derby theme this week, and we're going to see that continue to move. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, right? So there's going to be a lot of activity. Unfortunately, it's not going to fall out on like a nice, neat timeline where our bi-weekly meetings will necessarily fit when those actions are. So apologies in advance. You might be getting a few more emails from us. You might see a little bit more activity on our social media platforms as we try to keep you all informed. And remember, we are always around to help answer any of your questions or sort of help walk you through or connect you to somebody to walk you through any of these issues. This work doesn't happen by accident. It's because you and I and G and Karen, we're all in community and we're working together. We're rowing in the same direction. But that also takes strategy and that takes time on our part. And so I hope you will consider, many of you already are, but consider either making a one-time donation, becoming a monthly sustaining donor, which is so helpful to our work. Or if your organization hasn't already, renew or become a member of Mass Creative. And I know I see on this call a number of organizations that recently renewed, and I just want to thank you because it is so much more powerful when I am able to have a meeting with an elected official and say, Mass Creative has 400 organizational members and individuals who care about that, you know, about 16,000 individuals in Massachusetts who care deeply about these issues. So I thank you in advance for anything you are willing to share in terms of supporting our work. But we are a little over time, but I want to just check in and see if there are any questions that folks have. Feel free to either use the chat or you can just, there's a few of us, but not a ton of us. So if you want to go off mute and ask a question, we're here. Okay. With no question, let's see. Oh, do I have specific advice about arts organizations amplifying messages about reproductive rights? I actually would point you in the direction of the communications work that Company One did. I think they actually laid out a pretty nice roadmap about how to talk about and contextualize why Company One was including this in their work, right? That it was part of their mission. And so I encourage you to take a look at that work, and I want to give credit where credit's due on that work. I think the other thing is, right, is that we've seen, you know, we all know that many of our organizations put out statements in the spring and summer of 2020, but unless it is backed with some sort of action or direction to share with folks, that can often fall flat. So just think about that. Think about what are the action steps you want your community to take. I also want to just remind us that there's been some recent data that says that residents in Massachusetts greatly value their arts and cultural organizations, and they believe that those organizations have a role to play in social issues. So this is not a place, maybe you'll get a couple of emails saying, why are you getting engaged in this? You just produce art. But most people want to see our arts organizations step up and be part of larger conversations that affect our communities. Nikki, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I had a question about the mass hires funds.
Sure.
I think an issue that we're definitely seeing in Worcester in the city is we're having a hard time hiring people. We've got so many open roles, and frankly, we're just not competitive with what the private sector is able to do. Do you know if those funds could be used not just for hiring for new positions, but how they could be used to like retain existing employees?
Yeah, and so I'm sure there's someone on this call who's like, I have read everything about this. So the reading that I have done is saying, no, you can't. So you can't sort of say, we've got this longtime employee who's like about to jump ship. We want to be able to provide them with like a 5-year milestone bonus. That it really is focused on new employees. Let me phrase that: new hires, right? Like, so if you're hiring someone into the organization, that's where they're really putting the focus. But Nikki, I agree with you, and I think this is part of the larger conversation, right? And Mass Creative is certainly not immune to that. Is the issue of how to stay competitive in this marketplace, how to stay. I think many of us have been working in the nonprofit arts sector, and the love subsidy that we get because we're passionate about the issue is no longer enough making up that delta. And I think that that's probably going to be something that we as a community need to engage on and think about, not just simply about like, how do we get more state or federal money in order to help that problem, but how do we think more innovatively around that whole issue. I don't have an answer to how to do that, but I'm super interested in if other folks on this call want to have that conversation.
Likewise, I saw Ruth nodding passionately
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
I feel like she might know something.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Hire Now and everything I've seen. I mean, you can give bonuses to new employees, but there's nothing to keep existing employees, sadly.
Yeah.
That definitely feels like a missed opportunity because there's so much knowledge in my brain that would never transfer. It would take years for a new person to pick up on. So
it's actually really helpful information. And I appreciate the input because that can help sort of inform the direction that Mass Creative writes testimony too, right? Like, what does it look like? I'm spitballing here. What does it look like if that Hire Now program actually has makes it eligible for retaining long-term employees?
Yeah, I'm not saying I want to go anywhere, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been tempted.
I will not tell your boss.
She knows.
Oh, she knows. She knows. All right. I want to thank you all this morning. I want to thank you, as always, for being part of this larger advocacy community, for coming and showing up and asking really smart, insightful questions, providing examples of work and the way that we're doing our work in different ways. Thank you. It means quite a bit to the staff at Mass Creative that we are here together. As always, as I'll just repeat myself, we are here if you have questions. We try as much as possible to either find the answer for you or to connect you with the person who we think has the answer. So always feel free to give us a holler or give us a shout. And I just also want to do another acknowledgement here, which is I talked a lot about how much activity is happening in the legislature. The legislature works full time and those staff members are always working. And this is going to be a real hard crunch for them. And this is also the time when I think we all get, we're all very passionate about all the issues that we care about. And these staff members care too. And so they are there as a resource. Your elected officials are absolutely there as a resource to help you navigate or answer questions. I had a call with a rep yesterday about an issue that we've been talking about for over 6 years, that it wasn't about filing a bill, or actually it was about filing a bill, but it was about his advocacy within an executive branch agency that moved something along. And that's the power of our elected officials who definitely care about this issue. So they are here, they are part of this community, and we're very grateful for them. So without further ado, have wonderful weekends. Happy Mother's Day to those of you who that is a positive experience, and for those of you who that is fraught. I am holding you in my heart this weekend. So have good weekends, and we will see you soon.